Should I start? Okay.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Sophia, and this is my presentation on male perceptions of slut walk. In 2011, Officer Michael Sanguiniti said during a campus safety lecture, "I've been told I'm not supposed to say this, but women should avoid dressing like sluts to not get raped." And this statement is a great epitome of rape logic. The idea that a woman's appearance dictates her sexual consent and justifies the rape of a scantily clad woman. To feminists, rape logic detrimentally shifts the accountability of rape from the assailant to the victim, which hinders the assailant from taking responsibility and stigmatizes rape victims. And often the victim will then avoid seeking help and justice, prolonging the negative impacts of rape, such as an increased risk of suicide, increased sense of helplessness and endangerment, increased fear and anxiety. So evidently, feminists consider eradicating rape logic a critical matter. And one movement that tackles this issue and has gained considerable momentum is a feminist movement called Slut Walk, which actually resulted from the 2011 statement by Michael Sanguiniti. Now, Slut Walk is actually quite unique because it aims to undermine rape logic by lampooning it. So slut walkers will label themselves as sluts and dress as that stereotypical provocative slut while making it incredibly clear that they are not consenting to sex. And they argue that this contradiction, that their resemblance to a slut does not dictate their sexual consent, effectively subverts rape logic. Now, slut walk also aims to undermine the male gaze. And under the male gaze, for a woman's sexuality to be socially tolerable, it must be passively responsive to male desire instead of self-initiated, and be in a monogamous relationship under the man's possession. So clearly, Slut Walk focuses a lot on female empowerment and female autonomy, and that actually brings me to my research question, or my research gap. Excuse me. What about men? If the sexual abuse and violence from men are both the catalyst and targets of Slut Walk, then wouldn't analyzing male responses aid the assessment of Slut Walk's success? And wouldn't this information inform the discussion about Slut Walk and inform participants and organizers of Slut Walk? But how did I get to my research gap? And I'll explore that in my literature review. So this first idea is that Slut Walk weakens rape logic in the male gaze. So Slut Walk shuns those sexist, objectifying standards of rape logic in the male gaze that tell women, be modest, be quiet, be sexually submissive. And Slut Walkers demonstrate that feminist aggression where they avidly voice their trauma and command sexual agency and blame assailants. And in doing so, they're refusing those images of shame that rape logic promotes in victims. And they empower themselves by embracing that pejorative word slut. They're saying, yes, I am a slut. I am sexually active, and you know what? I'm proud of it, and there's nothing wrong with that. And they're autonomously reshaping female sexuality. The second idea is that Slut Walk strengthens rape logic in the male gaze. So these scholars will argue that conforming to a slutty stereotype is not empowering. Slut is a form of degradation used to control and pressure a sexually active woman. And so when women attempt to gain sexual autonomy within that context of a slut, within that context of rape logic in the male gaze, it's not really successful because female empowerment and autonomy and rape logic in the male gaze, those two don't really align. And some also argue that Slut Walk's use of that term slut is deleterious because it not only reaffirms what a slut is as an overly promiscuous woman, but it normalizes calling women sluts. And this is argued just to be overall incredibly harmful to women and enhances the power of rape logic and the male gaze. And then we have male reactions to Slut Walk. As applied earlier in my research gap, literature existing on male reactions is pretty sparse and outdated, but the general consensus is that male reactions are negative. And typically that means that men will either they'll either sexually objectify slut walkers, or they'll support slut walkers, but they'll glorify themselves, they'll characterize themselves as these heroic, chivalrous individuals for supporting women. Or men might use Slut Walk as a platform to shed light on their own sexual trauma. And according to a lot of Slut Walk organizers, this de-emphasizes that core message of the movement that is centered around women and their experiences with being told that their appearance justifies their rape. Yet Slut Walk encourages gender inclusivity and male involvement, and that brings me back to my research gap and ultimately my research question, which is, what are male perceptions of slut walk in relation to rape logic in the male gaze? So I assumed that because participant identities would be kept confidential in the study, they would be truthful. And I had two hypotheses. My first hypothesis was that the male gaze and rape logic would be most prominent among conservatives, and they would utilize these ideologies to oppose slut walk. And my second hypothesis was that most participants would be vaguely supportive of slut walk simply because slut walk aims to erase prejudice, which is primarily considered a good thing, but they wouldn't be particularly passionate or empathetic about the movement. So to answer my research question, I utilized an exploratory qualitative design where I conducted a thematic analysis with data from interviews. So my first step was recruiting participants. Here I utilized purposive and snowball sampling, and I wanted to generate a politically diverse sample because feminism is a contentious political matter in our society, and I wanted to garner as holistic of a data set as possible. And so to determine political affiliation, I adopted a political affiliation test from the Teachers Curriculum Institute, which each interviewee completed. So the second step was interviewing. According to leading researchers, that lack of pre-existing literature on male perceptions is aptly addressed by semi-structured, in-depth, exploratory individual interviews, and so that is what I implemented in my study. These interviews followed a general guideline that involved rape logic, female empowerment, and slut walk's relation to both. But though these interviews followed this guideline, again, that semi-structured nature allowed me to develop questions as they arose throughout the interview, enabling a more expansive view of participants' ideas. And these interviews ranged about 20 minutes, were conducted from February to April 2024, and there were 14 interviews in total. So for my third step, to analyze my data, I used Braun and Clark's six-step thematic analysis, which consists of 1, familiarization with data, 2, generating codes, 3, generating themes, 4, reviewing themes, 5, defining and naming themes, and 6, locating exemplars. And a thematic analysis was most suitable for my research because there exists little research on male reactions, and thematic analysis was not tied to a pre-existing theory, allowing me to thoroughly explore those nuances in the data and inductively generate themes. So I developed 4 themes in total, which was empowering women related to resultant societal productivity, and excessive emphasis on appearance, which is related to disempowering sexuality. And let's elaborate further on those themes. So for the first theme, this was excessive emphasis on appearance, and this theme evoked a sense of tactical inadequacy, that slut walk's unconventional focus on appearance made it unable to appeal to a large audience and garner the necessary support to cripple rape logic. For example, Chris said that slut walk is only just cutting the tip of the iceberg, but it never gets to the root of rape logic. And this belief that a woman's appearance is not a cause of rape logic, but rather a justification of rape logic, conveys that rape logic can't be diminished by merely saying appearance doesn't equal sexual consent. Rape logic can only be diminished through a mass social change that overturns those inherent problems responsible for sexist ideologies. And this strengthens the idea that slut walk is simply too niche to effectively educate and transform the public. The second theme was of disempowering sexuality, and these participants considered slut walk's public embrace of sexuality as undignifying. For example, Douglas questioned that use of the word slut, of that pejorative word slut, and declared that a woman's accountability over how she dresses and acts is indicative of her value. And this idea that a woman's self-worth is reduced through slutty characteristics engenders the idea that slut walk actively dishonors women. And additionally, that emphasis on female accountability minimizes male accountability, further contradicting slut walk's message, which states that rapists are always held fully responsible. So this theme conveys that though rape logic is wrong, immodesty is also wrong. And yes, women deserve to be empowered, but promiscuity is not empowering. So for my third theme, this was actually contrary to the theme of excessive emphasis on appearance, and because these participants believed that slut walk competently raised awareness about rape logic and fostered fruitful discussions and increased male solidarity with women. And for instance, James said that when you get these movements, you'll have conversations about rape logic and you'll have awareness about it, and then you'll realize that it's completely nonsensical to approve of rape logic. And so James believes that Slutwalk stimulates discussions simply because its protests provide a platform for conversations about rape logic and thus encourages dialogue. And the idea that fruitful discussion naturally emerges from Slutwalk dismisses those tactical issues that the theme excessive emphasis on appearance presents and supports Slutwalk's efficacy almost unconditionally. So the fourth theme was empowering women. And though most participants who believed that Slutwalk was disempowering cited Slutwalk's sexuality, many participants who believed Slutwalk was empowering alluded to a greater array of reasons, such as how Slutwalk encouraged women to be confident, to be autonomous, to defy these objectifying forces of rape logic and the male gaze. For example, Wesley said that Slutwalk encourages women to be strong and brave and bold and not let rape logic affect how they act, and that's empowering. And the belief that strength and bravery and rebellion, these traditionally unfeminine characteristics, are empowering conveys the idea that that rejecting the male gaze's assessment of women as passive, submissive individuals empowers them. And this also suggests that sexuality itself is not empowering, but is a vehicle of empowerment by representing Slutwalker's resolution. And this idea that women are empowered by autonomously dressing how they want bolsters that theme that Slutwalk empowers women. So to further analyze male beliefs about Slutwalk, I also identified patterns surrounding themes and political affiliations. And as we can see here, the themes resultant societal productivity and empowering women appear across the political spectrum, but the themes disempowering sexuality and excessive emphasis on appearance are primarily exhibited by conservative individuals. So what does this all mean? Well, in my discussion, my first hypothesis was that the male gaze and rape logic would occur most among conservatives, and this was actually correct. Among the conservative critics, the male gaze seemed ingrained into their beliefs, which was only reinforced when they condemned Slutwalk. And the reinforcement of the male gaze supports those anti-Slutwalk ideas from the literature review that Slutwalk detrimentally defines women's sexuality around degrading constructs. However, while nearly all Slutwalk critics were conservative, several conservatives supported Slutwalk. So though Slutwalk may not significantly impact conservatives already utilizing the male gaze, it can appeal to both conservatives and liberals. My second hypothesis was that most participants would be vaguely supportive of Slutwalk, but they wouldn't be passionate about it. And this was actually incorrect. Many participants were actually really passionate about that fight for women's rights and fervently expressed their solidarity and beliefs. And this contradicts the current literature about male reactions to Slutwalk that chiefly appraises male involvement as negative. Additionally, many participants across the political spectrum prioritize Slutwalk's morals over its strategies. They supported Slutwalk simply because it aims to erase sexism, even if their personal morals conflicted with sexuality or immodesty. Now, what are the implications of this? Well, this implies that in the past decade, there has been a progressive transformation in society favoring gender equality. And it also suggests that while Slutwalk fails to appeal to some conservatives, many men are supportive of it, indicating that Slutwalk alienates some conservatives, but not all men. Additionally, though Slutwalk strategies are crucial, they aren't as important as its purpose. And with such a profound pattern of men supporting women's rights, Slutwalk may be quite fruitful despite its controversies. The study's results provide direction for organizers of Slutwalk and other feminist movements. Aware of the significance of the movement's purpose over its tactics, organizers can devote greater efforts to educating outsiders about the movement's morals and ideologies instead of cultivating exciting or unique protest strategies. But the broad male support for Slutwalk also brings an optimistic tone to the grave battle for gender equality and shows that though this battle is still ongoing, even contentious movements like Slutwalk can make a positive impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. I just have a few questions for you. Number one is, how did you determine which results generated by your research method were most important to informing your new understanding?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. As I stated earlier, I use a thematic analysis, and the coding process is it's an incredibly comprehensive process, and sometimes there's just so much data, and it's easy to become overwhelmed by this data, or it's easy to become excited or distracted by a particularly interesting finding that's not relevant to the research question. And additionally, because of these were interviews, sometimes participants might have drifted off and away from my question, right, and they started going on a little tangent, and it was important to redirect the conversation back to the research question. So I think that, it was definitely, I definitely had to stop and rewrite and think and be like, okay, well, am I going on the right path? Are these findings and my analyses, are they effectively answering my research question? And so definitely having my research question in mind and focalizing that, it definitely helped me determine which findings were most relevant, which findings were important, and develop those themes that effectively answer my research question.
Thank you. Number 2 is, how did the limitations of your method or data influence your new understanding?
Well, so thematic analysis, it's a very subjective process. Actually, according to Braun and Clark, who developed the thematic analysis, they stated that, if you were to give the same data set to two different researchers, they wouldn't produce the same themes. And so being cognizant of that, that really helped me because that was definitely a limitation, right? The subjectivity of thematic analysis, but I remained cognizant of that, and I followed Braun and Clark's suggestions to be reflective of your personal biases, and that's actually why I did the political affiliation graph after I had developed all my themes. So knowledge of the political affiliations of participants wouldn't impact my analysis of the data, and that's also why in my research paper I published all interview transcripts, so perhaps other researchers who might not agree with my themes might approach that data with a fresh perspective. So definitely I would say that thematic analysis, it being subject to the researcher's interpretations, it is positive, but it's also definitely a limitation. And to address that, I had to be constantly reflective and be aware of my biases and my beliefs.
Thank you, Sophie. And the last question is, what was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process, and how might you apply it to your future endeavors?
Yeah, so I want to be an English major. I'm currently an intern at a magazine, and I love journalism, and I think that this interview and this study where I had to interview so many people and recruit people, it was a really valuable skill to improve on, and especially that semi-structured nature of interviews where I had to pay close attention, and be closely engaged with these participants to ensure that they weren't drifting off, and to ensure that what they were saying was answering my research question, and while they were talking, considering, well, is this relevant, or is this not deep enough? Should I ask more? Should I probe their beliefs a little bit further? And so this entire process where I had to approach all these different people, these strangers, and talk to them about their beliefs, and be engaged and polite and courteous, but also just analyzing on the spot, is this good data that I'm getting? That was really, really helpful, and I'm really glad I had the opportunity to improve on this in the study, because I think it'll definitely help me in my future career.
And how will it help you in your future?
Well, it's just because I want to pursue English and perhaps journalism, and so interviewing and recruiting those participants really helped me strengthen those connection skills and those speaking skills and communication skills.
Thank you. Okay, that ends our presentation.
Thank you.